the question number 2A. Take a look at this. Impact of digital technology as a reliable source of input for rational decision making is a debatable issue. Critically evaluate with suitable example. It means here you see what UPSC is trying to ask. Actually, it is asking that whether digital technology could be considered as a reliable source of input for rational decision making. Can we make our, or can we take rather, our decisions based on the input that we get because of the use of digital technology? And the question itself says that it is a debatable issue. It is saying that it is not my way or the highway. It is not 1 and 0 binary kind of position. Rather, this is a flux kind of position. It's a debatable issue. Some feel that digital technology is a reliable source, whereas others who contest this view, that is what this question is actually making us realize in its first line. So it says that digital technology as a reliable source of input for rational decision making is a debatable issue. So the emphasis in this answer should be on these words: digital technology, rational decision making, and whether it's a debatable issue. और अगर ये बात यहाँ से नहीं क्लियर होती तो आगे और क्लियर कर देते हैं उसको, where they write critically evaluate. Evaluation is nothing but testing. Like when your papers are evaluated, is nothing but testing of your writing. And critically means you have to highlight the pros, the cons, and on the basis of pros and cons, finally you have to give a conclusion. So it is again, these pros and cons are always associated with a debate. In a debate, there is a proposition and there is an opposition. So that's why you see pros and cons are inherently linked to any debate. And it says that try to do this with suitable example. It means give some examples for that. That digital technology is not a reliable or is a reliable input for rational decision making. I hope you understand the various words in this question. तो अब हमको समझना क्या है इसमें. देखो, जब हम आंसर लिखने चलेंगे तो हमको सबसे पहले डिजिटल टेक्नोलॉजी, you understand, right? It is the use of ICT, that's digital technology. Rational decision making, you have to first explain in your answer what is rational decision making, where in rational decision making we use digital technology, and why rational decision making on the basis of digital technology input is a debatable issue, and you have to give example for that. Do you understand that? So this is what you have to do. So let's try to write an answer for this, and for this we will first try to understand what is rational decision making. Now this is question number 2. This is question number 2, part A. Question number 2, part A. Rational decision making. You see, rational decision making is a process. It is a methodology in which decision is taken after evaluating all the options. That is the rational decision making. So taking decisions after evaluating various options. That is rational decision making, and you see that it is a step by step process or methodology. While we evaluate the various options, the evaluation is done on the basis of logic and reason. It means the cognitive faculties of your mind are responsible for rational decision making. In such decision making, there is no place for intuition or subjectivity. Keep this in mind also. Now look here, friends. What am I saying? I'm saying that rational decision making is a methodological process in which we evaluate various options before we come to the conclusion. Therefore, it's a step-by-step process, and while we are evaluating the various options, we use logic and reason. It means our cognitive abilities. There is no place for intuition or subjectivity. It means emotions are not given any weightage while we are making decisions on the basis of reason or logic. Do you understand that? Now, when I say that this is a step-by-step process, what are the different steps in rational decision making? Let's try to identify these steps. So the first step is where we identify the problem. That's the first step in rational decision making. Then we find out the reasons that create the problem or feed into the problem. Then we collect data, organize the data, and process the data to come to conclusion with respect to what information can be drawn from that data. Data processing always helps in delivering information. Then we generate the various alternatives. Alternatives are nothing but the various options. Then we evaluate the various options. It means we see the pro and the con, or we see the merit and the demerit of every option. Then we select the best possible option. You see, many of the case studies, the questions are in the mold of rational decision making. I hope you can relate to that at least by these 3 points, point number 4, 5 and 6. Then it does not stop. We study the outcome of our option, and on the basis of this we create feedback loops or feedback mechanisms which helps us in further identification of greater problems, or new dimensions in the same problem. This is how rational decision making actually takes place. Do you understand that? अब एक चीज देखो. If we want to understand this with the help of an example, think of this. Suppose there is a region where the main problem is female illiteracy. So female illiteracy is the major problem in that region. Do you understand that? So first we will identify the problem, then find out the reasons for that problem. Suppose there are 3 important reasons for this problem. First is patriarchy. Second is economic deprivation, or think of poverty. And third is lack of infrastructure, social infrastructure like schools, colleges, etc. So these are the reasons. That would be the second step to find out the reason. The third step would be to then collect data with respect to these reasons. It means how many percentage of girls have not gone to school or have decided to drop out because of patriarchy, because of economic deprivation or poverty, because of lack of infrastructure, or are there more reasons in one particular case, like suppose there is a girl child who has not gone to school because of poverty, because of patriarchy, and because of lack of infrastructure. So you have to find out all of that. Do you understand that? So you see that then we would collect data, and this data could be collected with the use of digital technologies. I'll come to it in a moment, but I hope you can understand this. So the next thing would be collection of data regarding all the reasons. Then generate, or rather then we need to organize the data. Organize the data means that we need to attach weights to this data and highlight that which is the biggest contributor to female illiteracy. Like say for example, we find out that the biggest contributor to illiteracy is lack of infrastructure. Do you understand that? So we will prioritize the reasons on the basis of data, and you see that with the help of this data, we will create a priority list, and in that priority list, we will highlight that which is the primary reason for female illiteracy. That would be organization of data or prioritization of data. Then comes processing of the data. Processing of the data will be done so that we come up with one information. Or, you know, sometimes data could be huge, and huge data may create confusion. Information is derived after processing the data. Information are intelligible outcomes of data processing which could be utilized for decision making. That is information. Do you understand that? So suppose one major information can be drawn after processing this data. Then we need to generate the different alternatives or options that what can be done. Like say for example, social methods should be applied, administrative methods should be applied, or a combination of different methods should be applied. So we will prioritize our options, what we can do to improve female literacy in the region. Then we will evaluate various options. What are the merits, what are the demerits of every option? We will select the most suitable option. Then we will see the outcome of our action based on our most desirable option. Like say for example, whether it has actually translated into an improvement in gross enrollment ratio, or dropout ratio has dwindled, or what about the nutritional requirement, what about the sanitation, water related requirements, whether it was helpful in fighting patriarchy and poverty, whether the women who are now getting education or the girls who are now getting education, what is happening to their mental health, all of that. Do you understand that? So that would be the study of the outcome, and then on the basis of that study we will create feedback mechanisms which would be given to the first stage one more time, and it keeps on going like this. So it's a step by step process. That's what I said, that rational decision making is a step by step process. But in all of this you see there is mostly usage of logic and reason. Do you understand that? But see friends, where we can use digital technology in all of that? Well, this is a no-brainer and no prizes for guessing that it is at this stage, collection of data, organization of data and processing of data, digital technologies can act as a boon. They can help in cutting down the time that is required for data collection, organization of data and processing of data. Digital technologies in this way could help enormously in the third stage of, or the third step of the rational decision making. So this is where you can write the positive aspect of it, and you can give some examples to this. Like say for example that during the COVID-19 pandemic, government came out with several applications, and through which government asked information from the people that whether they are vaccinated, whether they are developing symptoms of COVID and all. So on the basis of those applications, on the basis of those websites, those apps, you see government got huge data in less time, and on the basis of that government was able to formulate the vaccine policy of India and actually implement that policy through the vaccination drive, which has now attained substantial proportions. Anyhow, so you see there ICT can help, but the question says that what are the problems with it? You have to highlight that also. So look here, think of the problems associated with digital technologies or input through digital technologies. The first problem is the digital divide. That exists in India. You know that many people, they lack digital literacy, and because they lack digital literacy, they cannot give the right information, or they fail to understand the complex user interface which is made for taking the data from them. Further, you see that in many parts of the country, there is severe underdevelopment and people lack basic education also. So forget about digital education. So there is a huge chunk of people in the country who would be untouched if we collect data only through digital sources and we make that as our basis for rational decision making. That's the first problem with digital data. Second is fake news. Now you know that most of the times what happens is, if we want to find out something, we just Google it or we try to study it on the Wikipedia. But look here that, friends, the information that you get from these sites are not always reliable. They are not always accurate. They are not always precise and accurate. So you know that rational decision making is based on accurate, reliable and fair data. And if people are giving information by studying fake news or say by looking at doctored news, they are trying to build a narrative, then you see that the information which would be supplied or the data that would be supplied would not be a true reflection of the reality. Then the third problem is what is known as digital amnesia. Now digital amnesia का मतलब ये है कि लोग बहुत जल्दी भूल जाते हैं when they try to collect and collate information. What do I mean by that? I simply mean that everything that you want to find out is just a click away. You can go to the Google and you can just find out anything that you are looking for. That's why people generally tend to forget the information which they studied earlier, and if such information skipped their mind, then you can understand that the options that they are generating on the basis of information might not be inclusive options that include all the information. Because everything is available at the tip of your finger, that's why you see that generally what happens is that people try not to retain the information. Digital technologies के साथ ये एक problem है, and there could also be infodemic, like there could be so much of information going on into the system that it becomes very difficult to distinguish what is the right information and what is not. Then you see the fourth problem is automation. Automation means, you see that in many cases, some applications that you fill, which are in the form of questionnaire, it has options like select or reject, say yes or no. And sometimes you see that if the field is not a mandatory entry, some fields are mandatory entries. So suppose the field is not a mandatory entry, by default answer is taken as your answer. That is known as automation, which is an important constituent of digital data collection. Automation की वजह से हो सकता है कि जो information गया है वो correct information नहीं हो, और अगर correct नहीं होगा information, then you can understand that the decision making would also not be so prominent. Do you get that? Now, look here, the fifth problem with digital data collection is that there could be prejudices and biases while supplying the data, if the data is based on voluntary feed and does not have objective entries. What do I mean by objective entries? it means buttons like yes, no, selection नहीं है, but समझ लो एक box दिया हुआ है where you have to write something. Do you understand that? So there, people's prejudices and biases would be reflected. Or say, for example, think of this, that there is one person who has read a fake news that vaccines are debilitating and they can cause cancer going forward. So if that is the case, you see that if the question is that whether you support the vaccination drive of the central and state governments, then he may write that no, I do not support it. Maybe he will not be able to give a proper explanation, medical explanation for it, but because he was motivated by a fake news, that's why you see that his biases, his prejudices would be reflected. Sometimes political biases, sometimes economic biases, sometimes philosophical biases, all may come into the picture and ruin the data feed, especially when it is voluntary feed and subjective in nature and not objective in nature. Do you understand that? Then you see the sixth problem with digital data is that it does not take into consideration the emotions, the values and the principles, because it is all based on reason and it is based on logic. It does not have place for subjectivity. That's why you see that emotions find no place in such decision making. And you think of foundational values like empathy and compassion. Can you divorce them from the emotional makeup of a person? You feel empathetic and compassionate only when you are filled with positive emotions of humanity. Do you understand that? That's why emotions, values and principles could be the ethical standards that you actually believe in. So you see, these are not covered when you are making your decision on the basis of data that you have collected from the digital sources. Do you get it? So what is the final conclusion? Because it's a critically analyzed kind of situation. The final conclusion is, yes, digital data does help. It is necessary for rational decision making. It also cuts down the time. It also helps in effective resource management. It also democratizes the data collection, especially when the data collection is on the basis of voluntary feed. But at the same time, it is not sufficient for rational decision making. For rational decision making, what we want apart from digital data is we want some sort of cross verification, and such cross verification can be done by strengthening the data collection centers like the NSSO. जो सैंपल है उसको अच्छे से डिजाइन किया जा सकता है, जो मेथड्स हैं उनको बेटर किया जा सकता है, एजुकेशन फैलाया जा सकता है, अवेयरनेस फैलाया जा सकता है, उसके बेसिस पे डेटा कलेक्ट किया जा सकता है. सो देयर हैज टू बी ऑलवेज अ काइंड ऑफ correlation and some sort of, you can understand, counter data source as well, or some sort of alternate data source as well. Like you all know about the voter verifiable paper audit trail, the VVPAT. Now you see VVPAT has revolutionized the EVMs. That's why you can say we can adopt the same kind of thing when it comes to data collection on the basis of digital technology. We must have something else as well to correlate, especially when you see that the outcome is not actually translating into transformation, and you can understand that through feedback loops. Clear, friends? Now, before I close this, you see that data is nothing but fact, but because it is sometimes based on voluntary feed, it could be twisted fact. Do you understand that? And here I am reminded of the Scottish philosopher David Hume, who said that we should not decide on value questions on the basis of factual things. Like say, for example, if we make a moral statement that everything that gives pleasure is ethically right, then suppose there is a person who derives pleasure by vandalism, who derives pleasure by murdering, then can we say that murder and vandalism are actually correct actions? This is known as David Hume's is-ought gap, or this is known as the fact value gap. It means we cannot decide on what we ought to do on the basis of what actually is or what exists. Clear? So here, if you write that thing at the conclusion of this answer, Scottish philosopher David Hume's is-ought gap or logic, then you would return with handsome marks. Okay friends, so this is what I wanted to say with respect to question number 2A. I open the floor again for your questions in and around this question. Okay, SR has asked, Sir, can cutting down on discretionary power of the public servant be a step towards preventing non-ethical behavior? Well, obviously, you must give some discretionary powers, because too much of detailing can create a lot of headache, and the person would be entangled in the web of operations and paperwork, and therefore you see that subjectivity would be totally lost from decision making at times, which is necessary. But yes, uninterrupted, unbounded discretionary powers can be misused, and that's why you see we must cut down the discretionary powers. We must cut down the discretionary powers where they are in excess, but we should not eliminate the discretionary powers, because some subjectivity is necessary, and that is how we will evaluate the good talent from the say average talent, and that is how we will get senior officers of the highest repute. क्योंकि अगर आपने सबको मैकेनिकल बना दिया, सब बस ऑर्डर फॉलो कर रहे हैं, इनिशिएटिव, इनोवेशन, क्रिएटिविटी would be lost. So some discretion should be allowed, but it should be checked with appropriate institutional measures. Okay, Lena has asked, we know that media and social media fail us many times, and if I want to include this point in answer like question number 2A, can I directly criticize it in my answer, as I most of the times get carried away? Yes, you see that criticism can be made around this point, Lena, but what is important is that you should not get carried away, because if you get carried away, you will lose the crux of answer writing. Then you would be writing like a journalist. A journalist could be biased, but a bureaucrat cannot be biased. So when you criticize, the criticism should be constructive. And when the criticism is constructive, when it is ethically acceptable according to the norms of the society, you should not make any personal attack, you should not show any biases, prejudices. Rather, you should clearly highlight the actual problem, and then you should also suggest some measures that could be taken to eliminate that problem. ये ज़्यादा अच्छा होगा, rather than just criticizing or getting carried away. Then in that way you can understand that you may enter into dangerous waters. So obviously you are correct on this, that you can include it, but keep your emotions in check.